March 6, 1944. High above a smoke-choked Berlin, the air vibrated with the thunder of engines and gunfire. More than 1 to 300 American bombers, escorted by hundreds of P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs, carved contrails through the cold, clouded sky. Below, the Third Reich's capital braced for ruin. But amidst this armada, one machine stood out, a fighter whose roar had deepened, whose climb had sharpened, whose presence seemed more alive than ever. The Republic P-47D Thunderbolt, once mocked as too heavy and too sluggish to challenge the Luftwaffe's elite, had become something else entirely. A new force. A transformed beast. In the months before this battle, Thunderbolt pilots struggled to keep up with their foes. The Luftwaffe's Fu-190s could twist, climb, and strike faster. Engineers in the United States knew the Thunderbolt's massive radial engine was powerful, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp. But its propeller, the very piece that converted raw energy into thrust, was holding it back. The old propeller, a narrow-bladed Curtiss design, strained under the engine's immense torque. Pilots often had to trade altitude for speed, unable to chase or escape as quickly as the fight demanded. The problem wasn't courage, it was physics. But as Berlin burned that March morning, something had changed. Thunderbolts were climbing higher, striking faster, diving harder, and living to fight another day. What no one outside Republic's engineering rooms and Hamilton Standard's workshops knew was that a revolution in metal and aerodynamics had quietly arrived. The secret lay in a new propeller. A broad, paddle-shaped blade that turned the Thunderbolt from an iron brute into a sky predator. And this was no mere upgrade. It was a miracle of wartime innovation, a mechanical revelation that would reshape the air war over Europe and give the Allies a weapon of breathtaking speed, endurance, and might. In early 1943, the Thunderbolt faced a dilemma that nearly crippled its legend before it began. Designed by the brilliant Georgian-American engineer Alexander Kartveli, the P-47 was a masterpiece of brute engineering, a 10-ton fighter wrapped around the mighty R2800 engine. It could dive faster than any aircraft in the sky, take punishing damage, and bring its pilot home. But when it came to climbing or accelerating, it lagged dangerously behind. At 25,000 feet, where Luftwaffe fighters thrived, the P-47 struggled to gain altitude. Pilots pushed throttles forward, but the old Curtiss propeller simply couldn't bite the air efficiently. In combat, a few seconds of hesitation meant death. Reports flooded back to Wright Field and Republic Aviation. Engine power strong, Gabby, climb rate poor. The Thunderbolt's immense potential was shackled by an aerodynamic bottleneck. Kartveli and his team knew the double Wasp engine could do more, far more. Yet even the best propeller engineers of 1942 insisted the Thunderbolt's limits had been reached. Its 2,000 horsepower was already over square, pushing beyond normal ratios of torque and blade size. Any further modification risked catastrophic engine failure. Still, war has a way of forcing miracles. Somewhere between New York's factory floors and England's muddy airfields, engineers refused to accept the impossible. They began to experiment. Sketches, models, and test flights pushed the limits of propeller science. If the Thunderbolt was ever to meet the Luftwaffe head-on, it needed more than power. It needed a propeller that could tame that power and unleash it with precision. The clock was ticking. Germany's air defenses were tightening, and the US 8th Air Force, losing bombers daily, demanded a solution. Deep inside the laboratories of Hamilton Standard propellers, a small team of engineers faced a paradox: how to harness the P-47's brutal horsepower without tearing its engine apart. The answer came in a shape, a simple, elegant curve that changed everything. Traditional propeller blades were narrow, like swords slicing through the wind, but the Hamilton team discovered that at high altitudes, air density dropped so drastically that these blades could no longer grip the air effectively. Their solution was the paddle blade, wider, heavier, and shaped more like the oar of a racing boat than a knife. By increasing the surface area, the new blades could convert the engine's torque into thrust far more efficiently, even in thin air. Tests showed astonishing results: faster climb, shorter takeoff, tighter turns, and up to 70 mph increase in top speed at altitude. But it wasn't simple. The new blades required stronger hubs, recalibrated governors and reinforced mounts. Test pilots reported violent torque effects during prototype trials. Yet when the balance was perfected, the transformation was undeniable. The once sluggish Thunderbolt became a rocket. The Jug, as pilots affectionately called it, could now chase German fighters, meet them head-on, and still make it home. Republic's engineers called it Project Paddle. Hamilton called it Model 24E50. History would call it a revolution in propeller design, one that would change air combat forever. When the first paddle blade-equipped Thunderbolts arrived in England in late 1943, pilots were skeptical. Many had died trusting earlier improvements. But the moment those new props spun up, disbelief turned to awe. Major Hub Zemke, commander of the legendary 56th Fighter Group, took off in one of the first modified aircraft. Within minutes, he radioed back to base, his voice electrified. "This ship climbs like a homesick angel." From that day, the transformation spread across squadrons. Pilots who once cursed the P-47 for its sluggishness now sang its praises. It could meet few 190s on equal terms, and when dived, nothing could touch it. In real combat, the difference was life itself. Climb rates improved by nearly 30%. Energy retention in high-altitude dogfights gave Thunderbolt pilots the ability to dictate engagement terms, a priceless advantage. The Luftwaffe took notice. Reports described a new type of American fighter, same silhouette, but faster, deadlier, impossible to outrun. By early 1944, the paddle prop Jug was rewriting the script of aerial warfare over Europe. And it was just in time, for the great air battles to come would decide the fate of the war in the West. February 20th, 1944, Operation Argument, or as pilots called it, Big Week. The Allied air campaign launched a relentless assault on Germany's aircraft industry. More than 3,800 sorties filled the winter skies, aiming to break the Luftwaffe once and for all. For the first time, the newly modified P-47 Thunderbolts with paddle blade props took center stage. From the moment the engines roared to life on English airfields, their sound was deeper, fuller, a growl that meant power. As waves of B-17s crossed the Rhine, the Luftwaffe rose in force, Fe-190s, Bf-109s, and Me-410s diving through formation after formation. Yet this time the escorts were waiting. Thunderbolts climbed higher than ever before, accelerating faster than the enemy could react. Major David Schilling of the 56th Fighter Group recalled that day vividly. You could almost feel it. The plane wanted to go. We weren't just defending bombers anymore. We were hunting. The statistics told the story. The P-47, once criticized for sluggish performance, now tore through the German ranks, claiming hundreds of victories during Big Week. Bomber losses dropped sharply. The new propellers allowed the Jugs to climb, dive, and recover without losing momentum, something unheard of months earlier. When the smoke cleared after 7 days of combat, the Luftwaffe's fighter reserves were crippled. Germany's aircraft factories lay in ruins, and the Americans finally held the upper hand in the European skies. The paddle blade propeller wasn't just an upgrade. It was a turning point in air superiority. Big Week had proven it beyond doubt. Behind every victory in the sky was a man on the ground who refused to accept limits. Alexander Kartveli, the brilliant mind behind the Thunderbolt, had spent years defending his heavy design. Critics in the Army Air Forces argued it was too big, too complex, too slow. Kartveli saw something they didn't: potential. When the propeller problem surfaced, Kartveli didn't retreat. He worked with engineers from Hamilton Standard and Pratt & Whitney, pushing test after test, redesign after redesign. He believed the P-47's engine still had untapped reserves. He was right. By refining the airflow through the engine cowling, recalibrating the supercharger, and pairing it with the new paddle blade prop, Kartveli unleashed the monster he had always envisioned. At full throttle, the P-47 could now reach speeds of 470 millipasses in a dive, rivaling the sleekest aircraft the Luftwaffe could field. Colleagues later said Kartveli worked like a man possessed. He was haunted by every report of a pilot lost to a performance gap he knew he could fix. By mid-1944, his persistence paid off. The Jug became the definitive American escort fighter, a flying fortress in its own right, unmatched in durability and power. Kartveli's genius wasn't just in design, it was in belief. In a time of crisis, he trusted physics, faith, and courage to push the Thunderbolt beyond every known limit. Technology means nothing without the men who wield it. The new paddle-blade Thunderbolt became a tool of heroes, pilots whose names would echo across history. Among them were France's Gabby, Gabreski, Robert Johnson, and Hub Zemke, legends of the 56th Fighter Group, known to the enemy as the Wolfpack. These men flew the Thunderbolt as an extension of their will. In their hands, the heavy fighter danced like a predator. Gabreski would become America's top ace in Europe, with 28 victories, most earned in a paddle-prop jug. They learned the aircraft's new rhythm, how to dive at 500 mph each, pull out at the edge of blackout, and climb again before the enemy recovered. Johnson once took 21 hits from cannon shells, yet his Thunderbolt brought him home safely. Its massive airframe and radial engine, absorbing punishment no liquid-cooled fighter could survive. The paddle blade prop turned the jug into a master of energy fighting. It could strike from above, recover faster, and choose its battles. Pilots called it the bulldog of the skies. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe dreaded its sight. German pilots reported, "The American with the wide propeller climbs like lightning. The propeller may have been forged in metal, but its legend was written in courage." The transformation of the Thunderbolt rippled far beyond dogfights. It changed strategy itself. Before the paddle-blade propeller, escort fighters were limited to short ranges, forced to turn back while bombers pressed deeper into Germany. With the improved climb rate and fuel economy that came from more efficient thrust, Thunderbolts could now escort bombers nearly to the heart of the Reich. That changed everything. The Luftwaffe, once able to ambush unescorted formations, now faced defenders from takeoff to target. American bombing accuracy improved. German aircraft production plummeted. Every mission drained the Reich's resources further. The new propeller also made low-altitude operations viable. Thunderbolts strafed rail lines, trucks and airfields across France and the Low Countries. The same machine that once struggled to climb was now feared for its devastating ground attacks. By D-Day, the P-47's dominance was absolute. Allied forces advancing through Normandy had an invisible guardian above, squadrons of paddle-blade, Thunderbolts that ruled the air with unmatched ferocity. The innovation that began in a laboratory had rewritten the very geometry of war. After the war, as the skies fell silent and nations rebuilt, engineers looked back on the Thunderbolt as a case study in problem-solving under fire. The lesson was simple but profound. Innovation often comes not from creating something new, but from seeing the familiar differently. A propeller had always been just a propeller until someone dared to reshape it. That willingness to challenge assumptions became the hallmark of post-war aviation. Jet designers, too, would draw inspiration from the Thunderbolt story, a reminder that aerodynamic progress was born of persistence, not perfection. The paddle-blade revolution also set the stage for future prop-driven legends, from the F-4U Corsair to the P-61 Black Widow. It proved that propeller science was still evolving, even as jets began to claim the future, and for Kartveli it was just the beginning. He would go on to design the F-84 Thunderjet and the F-105 Thunderchief, carrying the legacy of the jug into the jet age. Today, when a restored P-47 Thunderbolt roars to life at an airshow, its sound is not just mechanical, it's historical. That deep rhythmic growl carries the memory of the men who built, flew, and trusted it with their lives. Each spin of those broad Hamilton Standard blades is a tribute to the ingenuity that saved lives and won battles. The paddle blade prop didn't just make the Thunderbolt faster, it made it timeless. From the frozen air over Berlin to the quiet hangars of modern museums, the P-47 stands as proof that evolution, courage, and human genius can turn even the heaviest machine into an instrument of grace and power. What began as an engineering fix became an icon, a symbol of American resolve and innovation under fire. The jug was never elegant, never sleek, but in its thunderous strength and stubborn endurance, it embodied the spirit of the age it fought for, and the engineers and pilots who refused to give up until perfection was achieved. The war ended, but the sound of its victory, the deep paddle-driven hum of a P-47 in flight, still echoes through history.